we're going to be looking at aspects of resilience, and we're going to, in some ways, touch on two areas. One is your own personal resilience, and also we're going to look at some organisational issues. We are in a kind of workshop like this, we don't want to go into too much interpersonal detail, because to be honest, we don't have the safe structures for that. So we're going to really kind of address things that are appropriate within this context when we deal with personal.
Right. So I think we might have mentioned in the first session this morning how to get in contact or how to get access to our material. So you might want to just make a note of these web addresses. This one here, zebracollective.com. And you press the button and we make a little zebra move. There's a little, I think there's some audio with that. But, yeah, it's chewing now. I picked the zebra. The zebra is our metaphor for highly creative thinkers. And I just do want to say, by the way, that Scotia actually mentioned in the panel that everybody's creative. Of course, everybody's creative. We didn't have time to actually talk about the bell curve, but think of the bell curve, people who are highly creative thinkers. And I think that's the terminology that we want to keep using. People who are highly creative thinkers, like the bell curves, everybody can walk, but not everybody can win an Olympic walking race, you know, and some people, you know, are hampered in their walking and so on. And all it really means is that there's a bell curve in terms of capability. So we're proposing that highly creative thinking it's not equally distributed in the human population in the same way that height isn't equally distributed in the human population. Although, you know, I've got to try and stay away from something controversial. But even that is not. I don't know how many of you remember a song called Short People by a guy called Randy Newman. So Randy Newman wrote a song called Short People, and the lyrics go, short people, oh there we go. Short people got no reason, short people got no reason, short people got no reason to live. They've got little baby legs, they stand so low. You've got to pick them up just to say hello. They got little cars that go beep, beep, beep. They got little voices going cheep, cheep, cheep. Don't want no short people around here. And he had death threats. And nuns from the Catholic Church were protesting outside of his record company. And he came out and he said, look, this song's about racism. He said, I just picked something that I thought nobody would mistake. Like, who in their right mind would have a sort of a bias against short people? That's why he picked that as a topic, in a way to talk about racism at a time, you know, obviously when racial tension, you know, was pretty high in the US, although when isn't it really? So, so how to get in touch with us? Zebracollective.com. We picked the zebra as our image because the zebra is highly wired. The zebra is highly wired for perception. Is an incredibly social. They're incredibly social. They have a really extraordinary social structure. They're also highly communicative, and they've got a very, very specialised language that's sound and movement. They are the stripe. They're somewhat enigmatic. You know, are they black animal with white stripes or a white animal with black stripes? They sort of look all the same, except that each of those patterns of stripes is quite unique and individual. And they have the widest field of vision of any mammal. And they have this incredibly acute sense of hearing, so highly wired for perception, highly wired for social structures, highly wired for communication, enigmatic, but an individual, because no two zebras look alike. I mean, the final thing is that all attempts to tame zebras have failed, and so that we feel like that is the best image we can have for highly creative thinkers, you know, untamable. Anyway, that's our... how else to get in touch with us? So zebracollective.com, that gets you to our core consultancy and also our online subscription service. We interview high-end creative practitioners from across the globe and deliver exclusive material. Some of them we'll actually show you today, exclusive material that's in 5-minute chunks, and that's $5 a month. And then also the website for the book, Living with a Creative Mind, is livingwithacreativemind.com. So make a note of that, livingwithacreativemind.com. And then on Facebook, we're facebook.com/livingwithacreativemind or facebook.com/zebracollective. And if you're on Instagram, we don't have any Instagram. I've got a personal Instagram presence, so that if you want to see my photographs of sunsets and beaches and aeroplanes, it's instagram.com/Jeff Crabtree with a J. Julie's not on Instagram because of her professional ethics. Okay, so an overview of what we're doing from even this morning is that we initially looked at what seemed to be the problem, and then we proposed some frameworks to think about highly creative thinkers in the world, and then there are some implications for highly creative thinkers now for them individually, and then there are implications for the organisation. So we're going to sort of, in terms of building resilience. And the reason we're approaching this subject from the point of view of resilience is because the stress is real, the struggle is real. In fact, if you can hit the next slide, this is an excerpt from an interview with James Taylor and Elvis Costello. Elvis Costello fronts a TV program by CTV. It's called Spectacle, in which he interviews musicians and then talks to them about their world. And this little excerpt is James Taylor talking about the stress of being a professional performer.
It always amazes me that you know, when I'm on tour and we're in some place and I'm looking at the performance at the end of the day, and you wake up at 11 o'clock in the morning and then try to get something to eat, pack your bag, get on the bus, go to the venue where you're going to play, get ready and do your sound check, focus on that 8 o'clock hour when the show goes up, and then you're going to be working for 3 hours. It seems to me as though the dynamic of that is the rigors and the exceptionally intense, sort of personally risky aspect of that. That's something that in a normal civilian life, I think you would experience maybe once a year or once every other year at a job interview, or maybe if your kid makes it to the playoffs in the little leagues, or you have an experience like that, a tax audit, or a divorce or something like that. So, and to have something like that every night, and the way you feel afterwards, the exhilaration, and then the release that you feel afterwards, it's a lot of mileage to put on. That transition from being very private sort of event and doing it, you know, I was a sort of autobiographical singer-songwriter, and so it's a very intimate sound. It's a very close conversation, as you say, and to then take that to market and to somehow find it, you know, blown up and expanded. That's a transition that's been a challenge to a lot of people. I think it, you know, you could say that it killed some people. You know, that it was just too much.
So
Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Brian Jones, and still that transition of becoming the product, you know, and being somehow at the center of the popular culture for a moment. That's a big deal, and it's a shock to a lot of people.
Yeah, that was the slightly longer version of the edit. I was going to just cut in and go, he was talking about Janis Joplin and Brian Jones, and of course he was. A number of things that piece of interview raises. One, of course, obviously James Taylor is the most eloquent artist. If you've ever seen him in performance, it's quite something. And he hardly speaks, actually, between songs. I mean, he has a little bit of prepared material, but the songs themselves do the speaking, and you can almost see why when you hear him and see him doing that piece of interview, there's a lot of moments where he's really avoiding eye contact with everybody. He's quite an introverted individual, and it's not just that. You could see him talk about the stress of performance, particularly on the high stakes end, where you're an artist like James Taylor, who has, when you think about it, he employs a lot of people. So every time a major artist is performing, it's not just, the money is not just going through the front gate that gets into his pocket. There is that, but there are his musicians to pay, but then there are also all the people around that make that show happen, and there are so many people that are involved in actually bringing a live performance before an audience. There's the tech crew, there's the touring company, the tour management, there's the road crew, the loaders, and these are shows that move from place to place to place. And somebody like James Taylor, if you know, whatever you pay to see somebody like that, and you think that's a lot of money, it's going in his pocket. But actually, there's the venue hire, there's the people who work for the venues. These are all people who are part of the gigantic industry that live music performance is. It's a huge industry. And there's part of the pressure that he's talking about are those pressures. It's impossible not to feel those pressures as a performer at that level. And then he's talking about the personal pressure, which is it's impossible to not. I've got to make sure I'm saying that, not doing a double negative. It's impossible to underestimate. It's possible to underestimate. It's impossible not to underestimate the power of being as he described it, an intimate autobiographical performer, to suddenly be thrust into the centre of culture, and what that does. And there was a moment there where he said the stress of it is like if you have a tax audit, and the audience laughed. And I know, every time I watch that, I think, he's looking at them going, why are you laughing there? It's not a laughing matter that he's talking about. He's talking about colleagues who've lost their lives. Now, let's not underestimate also the fact that even though in our work in regional community arts groups, people are not standing up on stage with thousands of people looking at them, although sometimes they are. But friends who are running a community theatre group in another city, and they are literally seeing crowds of thousands come to their performances. So it's definitely not beyond the realms of possibility. But let's not underestimate the stresses that go on for an individual as well. And then you can see how that couples with this high and low tidal life. So the only response is how do we teach people to do that? Because if you actually try and get them to flatten out, if you try and get them to be balanced and be even, then ultimately it stops their creative productivity. So we can't stop the creative productivity, but we want them to continue being productive. We don't want to be exploitative in the way that we'll be productive and die young, which is the current kind of model. Or we'll exploit you while you're alive, and actually really, if you're a musician and you die, your catalogue suddenly becomes more valuable. It's even worse, it's insidious. So our approach has been to go, well, let's accept this high and low life, this roller coaster, this up and down existence as necessary for the creative process, and then help people manage what that means so that it can be managed and navigated healthily, navigated in the same way that we navigate the tides. So you don't run your boat on the rocks at low tide, and you don't try and sail at low tide, but that at high tide you use it for your benefit. So just a reminder, the creative process, and then the other model that we wanted to show you, just a reminder, the 9 dimensions of the creative mind. I see people reaching for their phones because they didn't get a photograph of it this morning. Now's your shot. Love the way the big screen brings out those colours, actually. And so if we have the next slide. This is what passes for resilience mostly in the live performance industry. And this is Katy Perry, who has just discovered in this moment, as she is about to go on stage, that her then husband, Russell Brand, had dumped her. She discovered by, I think, either Twitter or Instagram or a text, there was some sort of public act of I'm dropping you using social media.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on here.
I think she feels depressed.
Yeah.
No?
I love that we have a trinkets box.
Let me see that. Here. Oh, that's not meant to make you upset.
What is that?
It's a necklace that she's got for her birthday from Russell. The day after she got it, she thought she lost it at the venue.
You have 2 options. You can cancel the show, but you can do your best.
Start time.
Alright, everybody, here we go. Let's stand by all sides, stand by
Yes, you can, honestly, you've got to be moved. I'm moved every time I see that. That was from the movie Part of Me, which some of our other texts obscured. And then when we talk to a lot of people about resilience, we show them that video and go, look, is that resilience? They go, yeah, that's resilience, but it's not. That's the show must go on. It's professionalism. It's the show must go on. And anybody who's worked at all in the arts and performing, particularly performing industry, know that the show must go on. There are people there no matter what. And the show must go on is not resilience. So what is resilience? The next slide is our model of resilience. You can see in the background there are 6 components to it in our model. Can I say, by the way, there have been, and you're going to get a clearer shot of this in a moment, so wait, I'll hold the photos. There has been a major study across the disciplines, particularly psychology, into what constitutes resilience. Following World War II, actually. So we're talking about 60 to 70 years. So what we have done, like a lot of other people who are in this field, is synthesize the research. So what you're seeing is a synthesis of the research. Some people say there's like 3 keys to, 3 parts of resilience, or some people say there's 10, or some people there's 5. What we think is there are 6, but really it's just a question of how you subdivide them. So we are grouping all of the, there's about 28 different aspects to making resilience, to be honest. And there's even stuff emerging even now where people are pointing and saying, actually we think this is a part as well. It's a very difficult field to keep up with. But what we have done is, following some thinkers, some pretty good thinkers in this field, we've adopted a 6-factor model. They're different, you can group them in different ways. So some people say there's 3, some people say there's 5, some people say there's 7, 9, different versions. So there they are. That's a slide to get a photograph of. Relationships. The key thing that we're trying to accomplish is flexibility. That's the bottom right-hand corner. Mastery, which is how much control you exert over your external world. Relationships, it's obvious what they are. Values and beliefs. Identity, who you think you are. Obviously there's a big crossover there. And then strategies for personal growth. If you could just go back to the previous slide, Julie. The previous one. There, one of the things that happens to highly creative thinkers when they get under extreme stress, they start to get anxious and worried, is they start to become suspicious. Do you want to speak to this?
What you see often is a highly skinless person without the resilience can become highly defensive, and they are reactive to things. Somebody who is a very fast divergent thinker can easily shift into paranoia, particularly when you're looking at things like social media. And I think James Taylor, who was pre-social media, really was talking about what is a huge issue, and that is that if you are very sensitive, skinless, if you think fast, divergent thinker, if you feel things very deeply, and you're on social media, which is like your crack cocaine, then it's a recipe to develop different types of paranoia. And in actual fact, some research that I'm just getting published talks about the high kind of paranoia. What are they thinking about me? Are they judging me? I posted that and I didn't get as many likes as I should have. Do they not like me anymore? I'm in this performance and, I posted, but everyone's judging me. That kind of thinking, that paranoia of thinking is becoming increasingly common. And I'm more and more having to work with the artists that I work with on aspects to do with paranoia, because it's where their ability to develop resilience is out of play with the demands and the stresses that are on them. And so we are looking at ways to challenge some of these things, and we'll unpack some more.
In fact, this slide here shows you there's about 28 separate factors that research over the last 50 to 60 years has identified as being positively associated with the development of resilience. In fact, some of the research is like this. They look at kids who've been left orphaned or displaced persons, and they look at their lives over a period of time and go, what things did the ones who succeeded, what things did they share, and what things differentiated them from the group who didn't? Let's flip forward. So let's deal less with those at a microcosm and deal more with sort of some individual things. This is how we're going to deal with it, by looking at our own 9 dimensions model and looking at how specific aspects of specific strategies for resilience apply. Mindfulness, how it applies to cognition, a thing called exposure, how it applies to your skinlessness, then perspective, how it applies to focus, and so on.
And as I mentioned earlier, there are so many other things we could deal with in terms of resilience, but there are some aspects that it's not appropriate to deal with in the context of this very broad area. So they're the things that are really more for quite a closed, consistent group. So we're not going to cover those things, but we're just flagging that they are aspects of your internal beliefs, how you see your identity, aspects to do with your upbringing and childhood. They're incredibly important aspects, but we can't deal with them in this context. So the first thing that we are going to deal with is the idea of thought. And we talked about the fact that the creative person is a diverse